Dave Talks Comics and Cartoons. Episode 7. Hey folks, it's Dave Levine, Kilmarrock. And I've recorded a few more segments about comics and cartoons. I've got a segment on the Saga of Ra's al Ghul. I have a segment on my favorite X-Men stories. I have a segment on some comic books I bought recently. I have a segment on Fatale, Volume 1 of Fatale, and I have a segment on cartoons, most of which is devoted to an episode of Avengers, Earth's Mightiest Heroes. Now I want to talk Ra's al Ghul. I'm almost done reading the Saga of Ra's al Ghul, which was a 4-issue miniseries from 1988. It's all reprints. Some of the reprints are of Ra's al Ghul stories, Batman stories from Detective and from Batman. Although I think all of them are from Batman. I don't think any of them are from Detective. And there are a few other stories in there which have absolutely nothing to do with Ra's al Ghul. Some of them are Batman stories, some of them are not. Just about all of those that are not Ra's al Ghul stories are drawn by Neil Adams. And Neil Adams was part of the draw for me picking this up, and part of the draw for me was just reading the original stories. I think I'd read a couple of them before, but not all of them. Anyway, I gotta say I'm a little disappointed, not so much in the stories as much as in the packaging. The fact that there's really only 7 stories out of 12 in this collection, in this 4-issue series. Each issue has 3 stories in it, so 3 times 4 is 12. There's 2 stories in the first one, 2 stories in the second one, 2 stories in the third one, and 1 story in the fourth one that have anything to do with either Ra's al Ghul or his daughter Talia. So that was a little disappointing, the padding. I mean, they could have done this in 3 issues or possibly even 2. So that part's a little disappointing. The other thing that's a little disappointing is discovering that there were more stories, not drawn by Neil Adams, but there were more stories of Ra's al Ghul that in between the Batman, in between these and 1988, because the last of these is The Demon Lives Again, which is from September of 72, Batman 244. And subsequently, between then and 1988, there was, I don't know, another 15 stories. I looked it up. If you can look it up on Comic Book DB, if you just look up, do a search for Ra's al Ghul and then look for a chronological listing of his appearances. And so I went through those. I was thinking of picking some of those up now. But a lot of those appearances have not been reprinted, unlike these. Some of them have, but a lot of them have not been. And some of them are the asking prices are a little pricey. I mean, you're talking $4 or $5 an issue or more in some cases. So I'm not sure if I'm going to continue to read these. There are a few other Ra's al Ghul stories I'd like to read. Certainly the Son of the Demon, I think I would like to give a try, which was a OGN from 1987. So this would have just preceded this Saga of Ra's al Ghul. And then there is also another one. Where's it? Oh, Bride of the Demon from 1991. I think I'd also like to try that. And then there's also Batman Death and the Maiden. No, wait, Batman, something like that. Death and the Maidens from the early 2000s. Let's see if I can find that in this list. Batman Death and the Maidens. Yes, that's what it's called, which I think I bought the first issue of. And it's written by Greg Rucka. I like Greg Rucka. But I never, and I believe it's drawn by, wait, it's not, the name that's coming in my head is Carl Kiesel, but it's not Carl Kiesel, I don't think. Batman, Death, and the Maidens was drawn by Klaus Janson. That's who it was. So I like Klaus Janson. I like Greg Rucka. I should read it. So that's one that goes on the list of stuff to pick up and read. Oh, and there was another story which I have read, and I do have the, not the collection, but the 3 issues, a 3-issue series called Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman, Trinity, and he figured in there somehow. Although I haven't read it since it first came out in 10 years ago. So, but I still have them in a long box somewhere. So, I'm glad I read these issues. I don't feel like I got cheated, but I don't feel like I got any huge value out of it. But I think it was good to read them and to for historical reasons, to pick them up and to read them. So if you're interested in Ra's al Ghul, or you're interested in Batman's past, I'd say these are classic stories. I wouldn't necessarily expect them to be to blow your socks off. There's certainly some of them have been represented in things like Batman the Animated Series with different twists. There are a few Ra's al Ghul episodes in there, 2 or 3, I think. One of them involves Jonah Hex, but I don't think Ra's al Ghul plays a big part in that one. In fact, I think that was the very last episode of the series. And there's a couple others. I think one is called Avatar, which kind of has some similarities to the one that appeared, the story that appeared in The Demon Lives Again, because part of it takes place in the desert, and although I think there's some magic in it or something like that, but that's a pretty cool episode. I enjoyed that. And I guess the other thing to say is I wasn't completely blown away by Neil Adams' art. I mean, it's good, and it's. I just, the amount of praise it gets sometimes. Well, the amount of praise a lot of creators, a lot of artists, a lot of writers get, it's quite often overblown, in my opinion. But it didn't. It's not like reading Kirby. It doesn't have. It's not quite as fun as. I mean, he does a great job with the storytelling, but it's just not quite as fun as some other creators. And I guess at this point in my life, I almost prefer the cartoony a little bit to the realistic. And I think Neil Adams certainly strove for the more realistic look. So. And also, there's a couple of these issues, which obviously, and I'm not sure in other reprints if it's the same, but especially the last story, I believe it's just the last story. Let's see, I'm flipping through them right now. Yes, in the last collection, these stories, I don't know if this is the way they're originally done, but it looks like they were painted, the coloring, and it's some of the reprints, I don't know, they just don't come out that great. I don't know if that's the way it was originally or if that's just something that came out in the reprints. But they're interesting stories. They're good stories. I've got one more story to go. It's a Batman story drawn by Neil Adams, written by Denny O'Neil, but it has nothing to do with Ra's al Ghul, called A Vow from the Grave. So if you're interested in Ra's al Ghul, if you're interested in the history of Batman, I think these are stories to read. You do not need to pick up the Saga of Ra's al Ghul. There are plenty of other places to find it, I would suggest turning to Comic Book DB. They will list them there. You may have to do a little bit of research, but that's where to look. And once again, I don't feel like I wasted my time. I think this was worth reading for historical reasons. And now it's time to move on to something else. Okay, so this is a bit of follow-up on a segment I did a few episodes ago on my favorite X-Men stories. The website Comics Should Be Good, which is on CBR, Comic Book Resources, released their list, and most of the stories that I named made it on the list, all but two. Those two were X-Men 161, which was the story in which tells of how Professor X, when he still had the use of his legs, and Magneto teamed up way back in, I don't know, it's supposed to be the late 40s or the 50s, against Hydra and Baron Strucker. That story did not make the list. And the other one was X-Men Annual 3, which is the one in which Archon, the X-Men travel to an alternate universe where Archon has kidnapped Storm, I believe, wants her to be his queen, something like that. So those two didn't make the list, but all the other stories that I named did make the list. What stunned me was that I left a story off my list. And it stuns me because this is one of those books that I often cite as one of my favorites, and that is X-Men God Loves, Man Kills, which was one of the series of graphic novels that Marvel released in the early 1980s. And this was like the first comic book that stunned me, that just took my breath away, that just really knocked me down. It just, I guess, I don't know, it's written by Chris Claremont. It was drawn by Brent Anderson, and it tells a story of the X-Men dealing with, well, a real-world problem, which is a televangelist who has decided that mutants are evil and should be stamped out, and is trying to do things to do that. And it's got some, I don't know, I guess some people don't think they're great, but I think it's got some great dialogue in it. And it's got some really great moments. There's a point early in the story where it seems as if a couple of the X-Men have been killed, and when that happened, I really thought they were dead, and that stunned me. And just the whole subject of it, you know, that I think it was the first time that I saw how the X-Men, how you could relate what they are dealing with, the anti-mutant sentiments, how you could relate that to real-world stuff. And prior to that, everything that I'd read on the X-Men, they were fighting Magneto, they were fighting Dr. Doom, Arcade, aliens from space, you know. And this was the first time it really seemed like they dealt with a real world problem. And it's not that the art is, the art is good. It's really good. But it's not that it's as pretty as, like, say, what John Byrne did. But it's just, it's a really good story. It's been reprinted multiple times. It rated very high on the list. And I'm just stunned that I completely overlooked it. I was only looking at the individual issues of X-Men, and I just completely forgot God Loves, Man Kills, because even though I read it back in the day when it first came out. Okay, so this segment's going to be about stuff I bought recently. I do a lot of searching online for stuff I read about, hear about. I usually manage to restrain myself from buying too much stuff. I've already got a backlog of stuff to read, a Regina pile, but every once in a while I can't resist. So this past week I was on eBay and I found a copy of Best of DC. These are these little digest-sized volumes they used to put out in the early 80s. All reprints of older stories, some fairly recent stories, some much older stories. I have a few of them that I bought back in the day. This is one that I hadn't seen before. It's Best of DC number 21. It has 3 stories. One I have read before, and that is The Untold Origin of the Justice Society. And that was originally presented in DC Special number 29, which I already have, and I reread recently in the last 2 or 3 years. Pretty good story. Then the second story is a Golden Age story from All-Star Comics number 35. And this one is called The Day That Dropped Out of Time. And don't think I'm familiar with this one. They've got a long description of it if you look it up on in the Grand Comics database, but I'm not going to read that right now. And then finally, the third story in this digest, which is, I don't know, about 100 pages or something like that, the digest it is a story from Brave and the Bold, number 62, and I think that's before Brave and the Bold became kind of like Marvel Team Up or Marvel 2-in-1, where it was Batman each month teamed up with somebody else. Because in this case, it is Starman and Black Canary. And I think also, I think it's just Starman and Black Canary are the only heroes in this one. Anyway, I love the JSA, I love the Golden Age stories, I love also the stories from the Bronze Age, from the 70s, from the All-Star Comics revival. So, and I paid about, I think $4.75 with shipping for this, which isn't cheap, but it's not too expensive. I've seen people trying to sell these little digests for $10 and more, so it seemed like a pretty good deal. And my bid was $1.25, and shipping was another $3.50 or something like that, so that'd be $4.75, I think. Anyway, the other thing I bought this week was I found somebody selling individual issues of the Human Target series, the one from the early 2000s, about 10 years ago. It was written by Peter Milligan. I've got that, which they collected like the first 10 issues in 2 trades, and then they stopped collecting it in trade. And I waited a long time hoping that they would pick it up and start collecting it again, but they never did. Eventually, 2-3 years ago at Baltimore Comic-Con, I picked up issues 11 through 16. It only ran for 21 issues. There were no annuals. So I picked up the last 5 issues this week. I paid $10, including shipping, for all 5. Seems like a decent price, $2 a piece. Not exactly the cheapest. I would prefer to pay close to $1 a piece, but I've had trouble finding these. Who knows? Maybe if I'd waited, I would have found them at a con next year. I don't know. But it seemed like a reasonable price, so I decided to pick them up. And the Human Target, there was also, before this series, there was also a graphic novel, and there was also a mini-series, all written by Peter Milligan with different artists. But all excellent stuff. Well, I don't know. I think the last story that I read, issues 13 to 16, 14 to 16, I wasn't terribly impressed by, but for the most part, I really liked Peter Milligan's take on the Human Target, and I'm eager to read more of that. So that's what I've been buying, and hopefully I can restrain myself in the near future from buying too much more, but that's it for now. Up next, we have Fatale, Volume 1, Death Chases Me. I think I've talked about this a little bit before. I finished reading this collection, which is the first 5 issues of this, what I believe is an ongoing series. I'm not sure if the writer, Ed Brubaker, and artist Sean Phillips have a definite endpoint in mind for it or not. Wouldn't surprise me if they do. So I finished reading it. It's basically the story of, well, it's a little unclear who the main character is. Certainly the central character has to be Josephine, who is this mysterious woman who seems to be extremely long-lived, and there's something special about her, but even at the end of this arc, it's not really revealed what it is. So the story is definitely murky in places. I often found myself flipping back through the previous issues because I would read just an issue a week, which maybe a chapter a week, an issue a week, which maybe was a mistake, I'm not sure. But that's the way I like to read these things. And anyway, I would often find myself flipping back to try and pick up certain things, and Brubaker and Phillips definitely don't make it easy for you to do that. If things aren't really highlighted in bold, at least that's not my impression. And this definitely isn't the sort of book that you could just pick up an issue of randomly and understand. You might give you an idea of whether you like it or not, depending on what kind of stories you like, but it's not going to be something you're going to fully understand or understand that much of just from reading a single issue. It's the sort of book that you really need to stick with. And even then, at least through the first arc, everything isn't revealed, as I've said. Because it's still unclear to me what Josephine's secret is. There's something about her that's different, and it's hinted at. But it's still unclear. The big revelation seems to be that she isn't everything that she seems to be. Don't judge a book by its cover. So this arc draws the reader in. It certainly drew me in, but it doesn't come close to revealing its secrets. And what is revealed just seems to point to more mysteries, more locked doors. This probably isn't everybody's cup of tea. I'm sure it isn't, because it's not explicit enough. If you like mysteries, if you like that noir feeling stories, you'll probably like it, I think. But you have to, have a pretty high tolerance for mystery and for being kept in the dark. As far as the art goes, I liked the art, but I wasn't blown away by it. Sean Phillips. I felt the same way about Sleeper. Good stuff, but it didn't blow me away. And now, that said, I think that it's very well suited to the sort of story being told, what he does here. It really feels right, and it really feels gritty and dark, and the supernatural elements are there. And I think it's all drawn very well and colored nicely, and I think it's great, but I'm not blown away by it. And maybe that's a compliment. Maybe I'm saying he's doing it so well that I don't see the greatness in it. I'm not sure. So anyway, I think I will probably read more Fatale, not right away, hopefully soon, but I'm not sure how soon. But I do want to read more, and I think that's the important part. Cartoon Talk. Avengers, Earth's Mightiest Heroes, and Avatar. First off, Avatar. I'm about 5 episodes into season 2 of Avatar, Really enjoying it. The only episode that I wasn't really impressed by was episode 4, which was the one I believe called The Swamp. And I think the thing that bothered me the most about that episode was Saga. I mean, he just kept whining through the whole episode, and it just kind of grated on my nerves after a while. But other than that, the next episode, Avatar Day, was another good one. And I'm continuing to enjoy watching how the season evolves, including how I'm still waiting for Aang to meet up with Aang and his companions to meet up with Zuko again. And I kind of had a thought this week that maybe because Aang has to find somebody to teach him, that maybe when it comes to the third season that Zuko is going to be the one who has to teach him. But I have no idea. That's just a guess on my part. Okay, so the other series I want to talk about, the only other cartoon I'm watching now, is Avengers Earth's Mightiest Heroes, also season 2. And the episode I just watched was the 7th episode called Who Do You Trust? And this was a setup episode or an in-betweener. So it sets up a lot of things for things to come. And I think it really does a good job because, Nick Fury shows up and he gives Tony Stark some information which really messes with his head. And it's interesting because they really don't reveal everything. They're setting things up. And even to the viewer, they don't reveal everything. But basically, he gives him information telling him that the Skrulls have infiltrated S.H.I.E.L.D., they've infiltrated the Avengers, and what it sets up is this whole situation where Tony Stark starts questioning everything and all the Avengers. And I thought this was really cool because I'm not clear on who's who and what's what. Other than I believe Tony Stark is Tony Stark, and they've already revealed several episodes ago that Captain America is a Skrull, although I'm really not sure where the real Captain America is. And then in this episode, there's a reveal of another Skrull, although I'm not going to give that away. And anyway, a lot of this is based on a comic book story, which I've heard talked about on podcasts called Secret Invasion, but I haven't read Secret Invasion. I don't know how Secret Invasion plays out. And even if I did, they may have changed some things for the animated episode. So a couple other things about this episode. I noticed that the animation in there's a flashback scene to some stuff from season 1, and that the animation in the flashback actually looked better than a lot of the animation in the episode itself, and I thought that was kind of funny. And the other thing is that there's this point where Black Panther just disappears, and ultimately he returns to Wakanda, but I can't remember in the episode where he said he was taking off or at what point he disappeared. It was like he was there one minute and then the next he wasn't, but then somebody was saying something about him disappearing, so I don't know, maybe I should go back and watch the episode again, but I really don't remember him stating his intentions that he was leaving. But once again, maybe I missed something. Anyway, on the whole, really great episode. Can't wait to see where this goes, although from looking ahead, I can see that the next episode doesn't pick up on this one because it's a Thor-themed episode and focuses on Thor and Beta Ray Bill. So I'm also looking forward to that. And that's it for Cartoon Talk for this week. Okay, that's it for episode 7. Thank you for listening. If you want to reach me, you can email me at emaildavlevine@yahoo.com or tweet me at Kilmarock. I don't know when episode 8 will be released. I'm going to be kind of busy for the next couple weekends. I'm planning to record some segments over the next week or two, but I don't know if I'll have the time to put them all together and post them and all that. So if I'm lucky, I'll have something out in the next couple weeks. Otherwise, it might be 3 weeks before the next episode comes out. And I guess that's it. Talk to you next time.